I can't think of anybody who has a more varied career than you do.
Yes, varied is a kind way of putting it.
I see. Oh, so maybe it's not of your choice. But just to review why people might know you, you first shot out of the box with your brother with American Pie. Uh-huh. You went on to make a great About a Boy, which may be Hugh Grant's best film ever. I mean, it's just a fantastic movie. You've done In Good Company. You even did Little Fockers last year. And now you're back with Being Flynn, which is a relatively serious father-son movie about the homeless, and I mean, it feels like you're all over the map, and those are just your directorial efforts.
Yeah, right. Plays weirdly, actually, my brother and I wrote the Woody Allen animated film Ants before doing American Pie, so we actually went from a family film to ushering in the gross-out comedy era.
You must be so proud.
Yes, our parents were so proud. I always feel like there's some equation between comedy and drama, or comedy and tragedy, in what I'm doing, and even in what Chris and I did. My big hero actually is Anton Chekhov, the playwright, who in the front of his plays would write a comedy in 4 acts, and then they would be directed as flat-out tragedies, and he was always upset that he wasn't getting laughs because he thought they were funny. And I feel like I suffer from that affliction a little bit myself.
Wow. Well, if you're sharing an affliction with Chekhov, you're in pretty good company, I guess.
Better than tuberculosis, yeah.
Yes, that's right. Well, that's interesting. Now, let's talk a bit about Being Flynn. That's why you're here. I mean, we could spend all day talking about your varied career, but Being Flynn. Now, this is interesting. If I think of it as Chekhovian, I too, as an audience member of Chekhov, sometimes find the humor hard to find. Talk about what that movie seems very serious contemplation, Oedipal at times, and all sorts of dark things. Talk about the Chekhovian humor that you find in Being Flynn.
Sure. De Niro is playing a guy who considers himself one of 3 great writers that America's ever produced, along with Mark Twain and J.D. Salinger. Sadly for him, he's never been published, but that does not deter him from being a complete egomaniac. He's based on Nick Flynn, who wrote the memoir, his dad, Jonathan Flynn. He's based on Jonathan Flynn. And while Jonathan Flynn in real life, at some point, he was driving a cab, was an alcoholic, ended up hitting the skids and living in a homeless shelter where, by coincidence, his son was working. So he saw his son there, essentially started a relationship for the first time after not seeing him for 18 years. The real Jonathan Flynn, while he's never been published, has in fact now been played in a movie by Robert De Niro. And I went with De Niro and Nick Flynn up to visit his dad, and we all sat down, and far from being intimidated by meeting Robert De Niro, Jonathan Flynn looked at him and said, "So, do you think you can pull this off?" and Nick Flynn said, "Dad, he's a well-respected actor who's in The Godfather, etc." And Jonathan said, "Yeah, I heard you're good, but are you going to be able to play me?" It's a complete triumph of delusion over reality. And I think that when another striking thing is that when De Niro shows up at the shelter, it's not sort of abjectly or hat in hand. He shows up asking for a private room for his son and asking why he doesn't have the clout to get him one. Mm-hmm. He's based on a real character, and is dealing with questions of, essentially, I think what drew me to this story was the question of whether we're fated to become our parents. That's a sort of survival level question that Nick Flynn dealt with in life, and Paul Dano, who's playing Nick in the movie, deals with.
You've got a killer cast. I mean, I've interviewed Paul Dano before for a couple of others movies. I mean, he's been in some great movies, and we all know Julianne Moore, and we all know Robert De Niro. Can you talk about, because this is not your typical Hollywood blockbuster kind of movie. How did you get such quality people to do such earnest work?
I think it was really the story. I mean, the thing that was quite sort of touching to me was how Bob put himself on the line for it. To the extent that, I think he read it and it got under his skin somehow in the same way that it got under mine. And a month before he was supposed to start shooting, I needed a section where he was kicked out of the shelter for being so rowdy, and he's on the streets and it's snow. Mm-hmm. And he wasn't supposed to be shooting yet, but I got a weather report he's going to blizzard the next day. So I called him up and I said, "What are you doing tomorrow?" And he said, "Why?" And I said, "How'd you feel about going out with me and a camera guy in a car?" We went out on the street like a student film with no permits and shot with Robert De Niro, driving all around New York, particularly in sort of the financial district where I knew people would pay no attention to the camera or to Robert De Niro walking down the street in as much homeless costume as he had at that point. But it was really an indication to me of his attitude towards it. And I was always conscious of he's actually a really great, funny guy. But I was always conscious of working with somebody who's one of the pillars of the art form. In terms of Julianne Moore, I had really been wanting to work with her for a long time, and I feel like it's almost like the stamp of approval on a film to have her in it. Paul Dano, I think, is one of our most exciting young actors, and I knew he'd acted opposite Daniel Day-Lewis in a couple of films. And Daniel Day-Lewis is supposed to be quite intimidating, so I knew he wasn't going to be intimidated by acting opposite De Niro, and that he would push him. But he's also a nice, respectful guy too, so it wasn't going to be a pain in my butt off the in terms of that.
How did both Nick and Jonathan, the father, how did they respond? I assume they've seen the movie. How did they respond to their movie counterpart?
Nick has seen numerous versions of the movie. Jonathan, Nick is going to go show him the film. He's seen the trailer, and there's a part in the trailer and in the movie where De Niro is shouting at Paul Dano saying, "You are me, I made you." And apparently Jonathan, that was his favorite part, and he made his son play that over and over again. I think he gets a kick out of it, and in some way feels ownership over the whole thing.
That's very good.